Money Show.
Business Books.
Well, Elon Musk turned 44 this weekend, and he had a horrible weekend. An unmanned SpaceX rocket headed for the International Space Station exploded shortly after takeoff. Investigations are underway as to what caused it. That's the news aspect. But US-based business reporter Ashlee Vance has written a definitive book about Elon Musk, how the billionaire chief executive of SpaceX and Tesla is shaping our future. Ashlee Vance on the line to us from San Francisco this evening. Ashlee, thanks for joining us. Access to Elon Musk was tricky, and you had to work really hard to get him to cooperate, even though you'd been covering him and his companies for years.
I did. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me. Yeah, that's right. You know, I write for Business Week magazine here in the States, and I'd done a cover story on Elon in 2012, and I'd kind of been looking for a book to do. And when I saw the Tesla and SpaceX factories, I decided that's definitely what I wanted to focus on. And so I went to Elon and pitched him on the idea of the book, and he quite politely shut me down.
Was he polite? Because he doesn't have a reputation for being all warm, fuzzy, and polite.
No, I mean, he's not warm and fuzzy, but we had a pretty good rapport at that time, and you know, I'd made a legitimate sort of pitch to him, and he told me he wanted to do his own book, or he just didn't think the timing was right. He was quite polite about it. And then I spent 18 months, you know, I just kept going. I spent 18 months interviewing a couple hundred people, and then a lot of those people would call back to Elon and tell him what I was up to, and so this was no surprise to him. And, you know, eventually I wore him down, and he called me at home and said, okay, I'll participate.
Well, it wasn't that simple. I mean, you had to go to dinner with him, and you sat across the table with him, and you made small talk as best as Elon can, and you spoke about the state of the world and all of that sort of stuff. And it came down to the nitty-gritty, and he tried to hold you to ransom because he understood that in his business career, he's made lots of friends. He's also made, you know, a whole bunch of enemies, and many people have been through the Musk companies over the years. People who have been pushed out, forced out, and haven't ended well on that particular front. He realized he needed to have an input, which, and you stuck to your guns, not offering him any sort of right of rebuttal or footnotes as he wanted, because he wanted to give you thousands of pages of footnotes if he felt that you hadn't given him a fair hearing.
No, I mean, yeah, that's all right. You know, Elon, in this very Elon way, although I don't think it would be, you know, that atypical for executives like this, wanted control over the book. He definitely wanted to see it before it came out. And then, as you mentioned, he sort of came up with this idea to put footnotes in it, but I kept picturing in my head that the footnotes would run longer than the book, and the book might never get done. And so I turned him down. I had this huge 45-minute speech all lined up as to kind of why, you know, he should just let me do it in the proper journalistic way. And I got about 5 minutes into it. I guess he just had enough at that point. He just said, okay, fine, let's do it.
No, and good for you for persisting on that, because a lot of people have pitched books to him in the past. He's turned them down. You were the only one being as resilient as you were, and you finally managed to crack through. When you look at the access you got and the ability to get access to a diary and to see the business close at hand, you learned a lot through this process, having covered the company in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I learned a ton. I mean, not just about Elon, but also about the companies. I mean, a much more, you know, I ended up talking to almost 300 people, the vast majority of which were either current or former Tesla and SpaceX employees. And so, I don't know, you hear all these things, just like these legends that get passed around. Elon does this, you know, he contributes to the design of the car or the rocket, and you sort of don't know what's fact and what's fiction. And then, you know, ultimately at the end of this, I think I did. And then I think I got probably closer. I definitely got closer to Elon than any reporter has, and I felt like I was somewhere, you know, outside of his family and very close friends. You know, I'd gotten quite close to him.
He strikes me as something of a combination between Steve Jobs in that he's dogmatic, he's demanding, he is very particular about what does and does not work and what he will tolerate and won't tolerate. But there are also elements of Richard Branson in terms of the parties he has and the sense of fun that he does have as well. Would that be an accurate assessment of him?
I think that's absolutely right. The Steve Jobs stuff that jumped out at me was exactly along the lines that you mentioned. There's this, he's not like a consumer product guy like Steve Jobs, but he does have that same attention to detail. I saw him analyzing both the Model S sedan from Tesla and competitors' cars, and I mean, he was going through every single detail. He can be quite, he can be very hard on employees, just like Steve Jobs was. And then to your second point, I mean, absolutely, especially in Silicon Valley, we haven't seen a guy quite like Elon that enjoys the limelight, that he spends half his time in Hollywood and half in Silicon Valley. I mean, he is this kind of Richard Branson, Howard Hughes type figure who relishes the spotlight and uses it to his advantage.
He's a private guy, married to Tallulah, I forget her surname, the actress, twice.
Riley. Yeah.
And they've got a really interesting agreement. Now, Elon Musk listens to the show. He is Elon's dad, as you know. When you wanted to talk to Elon said, please don't. There seems to be a tension there that Elon doesn't want to talk about.
Well, I mean, Elon does talk about it a fair bit in the book. Yeah, I mean, initially he found out that I'd reached out to his dad, and I guess he was somewhere between sort of upset and miffed. And then, I talked to Elon and to his brother Kimball for a number of hours about all of this, and it was very strange. I mean, they would never get deep down into the specifics about the heart of their conflict with their dad, but they would constantly say that they had unpleasant childhoods.
Yeah, he didn't have a happy upbringing in South Africa, now in the United States. And I was doing some research for a separate project. I came across a 1965 newspaper clipping forecasting that by 1985, that's a long time ago, as you will know, Ashlee, we'd be flying between the SA and the UK and the United Kingdom through space at 12,000 miles per hour, and we'd be doing these rocket ships. It didn't happen. It was fantasy. It was fanciful. We know that now. In a way, one looks at Elon Musk and one looks at some of his more outrageous projects, and his PayPal has been an enormous success. Tesla is taking off. SpaceX is successful with one or two hiccups, but some of the projects do seem like the stuff of science fiction that perhaps won't be necessarily achieved in his lifetime, but he dreams a lot.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely true. And I mean, so one big point I make in the book is sort of exactly along the lines of what you're saying, is that I'd grown a bit cynical about Silicon Valley. Is part of the reason I did the book. There's a lot going on. We get so much attention here, but it's a lot of consumer products. It's a lot of entertainment, things that you could easily argue are quite trivial. And, we hadn't produced these inventions that we'd been promised in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and things like air travel haven't really improved. The same could be said for aerospace. I mean, you go look at most of the technology, it looks like it's from the 1950s. And so to me, Elon represents an attack on some of that, a sort of challenge to modernize industry, and so sort of a call to Silicon Valley and other young entrepreneurs to be a bit more daring, I think. And then some of the stuff he comes up with sounds kind of crazy. I think to some people you have to take him a little more seriously these days, because he has been on a heck of a run.
No, he most certainly has. I mean, is he really just a very clever kid in a grown man's body with lots of money at his disposal, and he's free to dream and he's free to pursue those dreams to get people in his lifetime on a colony on Mars? Because he fundamentally believes that our future is not on this planet but elsewhere in the solar system.
It's funny, I read somebody in one of the comments on about my book somewhere. They said, the funny thing about Elon is that he's really not that hard to sort of wrap your head around. I mean, he is a kid trapped in this. These are all sort of these like childhood fantasies that he's living out, and as you mentioned, has kind of gotten the resources to do it. I guess the one thing I would challenge it a little bit is that if you follow Elon's journey. It's not just anyone that can pull these things off. He's had to learn how to be a manager of people, and he started out being quite bad at it. and so he's not just sort of this boy who's able to do these things. I mean, he has learned to be sort of like a leader of people and to marshal all these forces.
Do you like him?
Well, there's a lot I like about him. We never, I would say we were never really friends. I mean, he's not even like the guy that you would, he's not the guy that you would want to have a beer with at the cricket match or the baseball game. It's just, there's
intense.
Not that pleasant. Yeah, there's not that pleasant sort of casual conversation. There's a lot about him I do like. I mean, I've met Steve Jobs. I've met all these guys. I think Elon can be very difficult and hard on people, but to me, he's much more likable than most of these other CEOs, and is not. He's got a huge ego and everything, but he doesn't have a lot of pretense, and he doesn't have a lot of handlers, and he's surprisingly down to earth.
Is he going to change the world for the better?
Well, I hope so. We still have a lot to be proven. If Tesla can get this sort of mainstream $30,000, $35,000 US dollar car, I would say then we sort of judge Elon on a new level. If that sort of a hit, the SpaceX, it was really sad to see what happened to the rocket this weekend. If they get reusable rockets and totally change the cost of aerospace, that's another huge thing. And then Solar City in the U.S. is actually this third company of his where he's chairman. They've become the largest installer of solar panels in the United States. And so you can argue that they've already had sort of the biggest impact of the three. So I think there's a lot still to be determined. I think in some ways, like if you just look at the software in cars and sort of what Tesla's done there and how everybody's copying him now, he already has changed the world.
Ashlee Vance, thank you so much for your time this evening. The author of Elon Musk, How a Billionaire Chief Executive of SpaceX and Tesla is Shaping Our Future. Ashlee Vance on the line to us from San Francisco. Fascinating discussion, a wonderful book, beautifully written, easy to read. And it's, I'm going to date myself, so I'm not going to say what kind of book it is, but it's an adventure story of a guy with a big brain and bigger